All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone who is joining us today for a Dream Data Live, another live of Attributed podcast. We're very excited to have you today. And today we're going to talk about a very fun topic for me to speak about. And we're going to speak about the quiet B2B expert and personal branding for them together with Goldie Chan. Goldie, welcome to the chat today. We're very excited to having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about how you can be successful even if you are an introvert. So, I have to ask Laura to start, are you an introvert? Do you consider yourself an introvert? No, I didn't
No,
think so.
no. Well, the reason I'm here as well, it's probably one of the things, but introverts also need to push them into those like lives and being even more there. No, I'm not one of these introverts that you usually speak about, but I'm very excited because we're trying to enable as many as possible people at DreamDate as well to be posting. And it's not always just the introvert thing. So that's why I'm very excited to hear your inputs and all the strategies that people can apply if they're kicking this off, and especially if you're introverts and you think it's cringe, because, well, it could feel like it if you haven't heard Goldie speak about it.
Yeah, so I love talking about I think, most people call it the cringe factor. I call it cringe mountain. So I think when we're climbing cringe mountain, it's so important to be able to let go of that, "Oh, I need to always feel comfortable. I always need to be perfect." I recently did a talk and this really young employee came up to me and she said, "Oh my gosh, I need everything to be perfect or else I won't get a raise or else I won't climb the ranks at work." And that's not true, of course, right? I think so many of us, especially who are more later and more senior in our careers, we know that part of climbing that career ladder means you have to have, at some points, good enough work, right? You need to do, and one of my friends has a beautiful book out there called The Good Enough Job. You need to do a good enough job at work so that way you can get ahead without losing your mind. And
Yep.
I think that also just overcoming that cringe factor, that cringe mountain is very helpful. So,
Oh, for sure. It's so interesting you say that. And this is not a part of the topic in the questions, but the
yes.
part about climbing your career ladder and wanting to be perfect. And
Yes.
all of us think that we need to do that. Unfortunately, AI feels perfect. Do we love it? Not
No.
sure. Why do we love humans? It's because we're imperfect and things don't
Yes.
happen that way.
I was going to say use exactly that word. I'm so glad you used that word, Laura. But the imperfection is really what humanizes, especially if you're building your personal brand out as a B2B marketer, engineer, etc. I think it's so helpful to have that imperfection because it's human and then therefore attractive, right? We are attracted to humanity from other people. And that's why it's so fascinating to watch AI try to replicate imperfection by being perfect and then trying to be imperfect. So it's a fascinating thing that technology is attempting to do right now.
Yeah, it's interesting you put cringe into the whole factor when talking about personal brand, because I think most, especially introverts, think that way, that building personal brand will be cringe. They don't
Right.
want to be seemingly like somebody else on Instagram or somewhere else. So B2B experts usually think that, oh, that building personal brand is just shameless self promotion, or like cry for
Right.
attention. Look at her. Goldie's always on. And is she trying to promote herself? Like, why has
Right.
personal brand become such a loaded, like, cringe term for B2B?
So I think especially for B2B, which is, I would say, less innovative in some respects in marketing than B2C, just naturally, right? Because B2C is so consumer facing, it can move more quickly. You also have D2C and B2C. I'm just throwing out all the terms, right? Direct to consumer in B2C versus in B2B, you're business to business. So you things just move a little bit more slowly. And I think that there's a resistance to promoting yourself, especially when you work in a field that is literally has the title business to business in it. And I think it's a little bit more conservative. I think that people are not always looking for what is the newest thing to do, right? People want proven. People
Mhm.
something that they can go back to the boss and say, "Listen, everyone at Coca-Cola, at Nike is doing this, so we should also, at SAP is doing this, so we should also be doing this." But I think the beauty of not having that is that when you do something that is already talked about, say, a lot in B2C, you can translate some of those skills to B2B and it looks very novel. It looks very new and very fresh. And that I think is very cool.
Nice. You work with a lot of brilliant engineers, and we often get some of our engineers and scientists excited about like, oh, I like what you guys are doing with social selling, but it still is very hard to get them over that kind of a hurdle for them. Why is that hurdle bigger for engineers and more technical people than the actual technical work they do?
Well, I think it's really funny when I meet engineers who are working on, say, an AI product, and I'll speak in the B2C space, right? Like an engineer who works in a B2C product that's all about promoting your brand. But then when I ask them, are you promoting your own brand? They're like, no, no, no. I'm on the technical back end of that. And I'll say, in my own personal life, there was a time period where I was never in front of camera. I was never promoting myself or building my personal brand. And I think there's a deep resistance sometimes, especially if they don't see their peers promoting themselves, right? So if you don't see your peers doing it, you may feel reluctant to promote yourself because you don't see anyone else at your level at work doing it. So I think one of the ways, and I was speaking with a company based out of the UK about this, which was one of the ways to make it a little bit easier, especially if you are a company looking to do more EGC, employee generated content, is to give clear guidelines and also to give seeds to promote. So if there is, say, a new product or there's a new thing that is coming down the line, to give talking points, to give structure, to give, and of course, not to say you absolutely have to post this, you have to say this, but just to say, this is coming out. We all know this product is coming out. Here's, a couple of marketing sound bites from marketing that you can post on your own channels. And that honestly makes it a little bit easier because suddenly you're empowering your engineers, your employees with these easy to use bits and pieces that then they don't have to think, oh my gosh, how do I write this right? Or how do I say this? Or it's cringy, or I'm afraid. And you get over that hump by giving them training wheels, content training wheels.
Yep, yep. That I love that. And now you're talking about involving marketing and helping them a little bit out. But if an expert decides to stay invisible, to avoid that cringe and I'm not there, what is the actual business cost to both their reputation but also company's authority?
Yes, so I think that there is an invisible business cost because you think right now, okay, well, no one is posting, so we're not losing anything. But what you're losing is if your competitors have employees who are posting intelligently and are sharing the message. If you have clients or customers who are also at their business also posting and thinking intelligently, and they might look at your brand and think, oh, they're a little antiquated. And it's that reputation, right, that you can't always control. It's the way also people talk outside reputation versus personal brand. So let's go there first. So, reputation versus personal brand. Personal brand is the story that you tell when you are in the room. So that's saying as Dream Data, we are great at XYZ. But reputation is when someone else says, when you aren't in the room, you know what? Dream Data is great at this, right? And you always want to have a strong personal brand. So you inform the reputation that you have outside of when you are in that room and you are able to directly say what you do. So I think it is a really good thing to always be thinking, okay, how can we inform that reputation. And yes, the business cost, of course, is that if your reputation is that you are always a little bit slower to the draw, a little bit slower to implement new ideas and new technologies in the marketing stack itself, especially internally, then that might give you the reputation of, okay, well, maybe then in their business side, they also are going to be slower to implement new ideas.
Interesting. And being in sales, I see the biggest impact being that brand that companies speak about when we're not in the room, the way they're
Yes.
reflecting on it. But if you if you tell the story, the market does it for you. But what does it mean for the sales cycle?
I'll just talk a little bit more about sales because I think that's where Laura was going with sales in general. And you know what? I will actually, let's take a pause and let's talk about something else that I think is very interesting that has been helpful for me in terms of growing my personal brand. Since we very lightly touched on AI, and there's two different tools that I love to use because I work very closely with them, but also I think they're great. One is Adobe Acrobat, which is very, very helpful for whenever I need to look at a lot of documents. And then also whenever I'm thinking about, I need to analyze a ton of stuff, then I'll use Adobe Acrobat PDF Spaces and I'll use that to analyze a lot of data and bring that back in. I also am such a fan of then Adobe Express because that's what I use to actually make my social posts. If you ever look at my profile, you'll see a couple of little tutorials here and there about how I create content across platforms. And I think that is one of the things to bring out too, which is it is very helpful to think, how can I make very interesting content at scale? And then also, how can I make content that goes across different platforms and is helpful there? So, definitely. And also, I think there's a couple people in the audience. So if you are in the audience right now, please drop a comment. And I'm going to kind of go through a couple of these questions. So there was one question that I saw in this, which I also really liked, which is, how do you clarify what your personal brand is? And this one is super tough, I think, in a lot of ways. And this is, I think, the core of any personal brand. So whether you are creating a personal brand from scratch or you are going from role to role and you want to make sure that your personal brand is deeply, deeply consistent, it's helpful to have clarity of what it is that you want to be known for. And for this, I have a really fun exercise I do with C-level executives. Hi.
All
And
right.
hi, Laura. I was just talking through clarity and I was going through an exercise really quickly. So let me just finish wrapping up my thought and then let's jump back in. But I was just saying that with clarity of your personal brand, it's helpful to do this exercise that I do with C-level executives, and that is picking out different keywords. So I have them, there are hard keywords and soft keywords. So hard keywords are basically your job function. So that might be engineer, that might be sales manager, right? And your soft keywords are the adjectives that describe what your function is. So maybe you are inquisitive, maybe you are forward thinking. So whatever those keywords are, you pick basically three keywords total, usually two soft keywords and one hard keyword, and you filter your personal brand through those keywords. And it makes it a lot easier than if you're jumping from, say, role to role, or you're changing industries, or whatever it is that's happening in your career, because all of us have very, very different careers now than I think they had. I was just talking about this with somebody else in the 1900s, right? Before the 2000s, you could have a consistent career where you work for 10 years, 20 years in one role. And now that's usually a little bit less true. So, how can you keep your personal brand consistent also over time? But Laura, so happy to have you back. We're
Yes.
just going through some of my five C's of my framework. But yeah, I want to know too, how have you had clarity over your brand over time or the work that you do?
It makes it much easier when you define the audience that you want to speak to. That helped me keep the clarity really. And that's also one thing that we always speak with our more technical people as well who would like to start posting or not sure. Like, speak as if you're speaking to that person that you're thinking of is your ICP. Why is this relevant for them? So if you keep
Yes.
the clarity of the wording, which specific keywords as you're mentioning are usually mentioned, it makes it so much easier to overcome that type of a hurdle.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you talked about ICP too. I think it's all of these are helpful ways to narrowly define who you're trying to speak to. And for the engineers out there who may be less familiar with terms like ICP, I'll say demographics, right?
Yeah.
What are the audience demographics? We'll use a different word that we're trying to speak to, and how can we define that? And I also like to do a really easy way of splitting that audience demographic if you aren't a marketer or you aren't in sales and you aren't as familiar with figuring out what that split is. I like to split it into three tiers. Am I speaking to my peers? So, am I speaking to people who have the same job function as me, do the same work, or are in the same industry vertical as me? Or am I speaking to people who are higher up? So that's my bosses. If I'm an entrepreneur, that is my board, right? That is all the people, or maybe that's my potential clients, right? My client potential customers. Am I speaking to this demographic? Or am I speaking to a general audience? So for something like this amazing podcast, we're speaking to a general audience. So which of these three tiers do you want to speak to? And I find that is so easy as a way to start clarifying who you want to speak to.
I like that you mentioned that type of clarity of who you want to speak to, but then there is that hurdle of if I'm trying to speak to, let's say, my buyers or potential investors, and I'm an introvert, that
Yes.
feels like a big hurdle to jump over. Is like, oh, they're all watching, they're all seeing what I'm posting, so I better do it perfect. How do you
Right.
overcome that hurdle with that type of logical approach that, okay, they're probably watching, or maybe they're not at the beginning as well because you don't have that much following? And how do you get through to actually speaking with them?
Right. So I will say this, when I first started posting on LinkedIn is a great example. I ended up doing over 800 daily consecutive videos over the course of 2 years. But when I started, and I was in LinkedIn video beta, so even fewer people were watching me back then. But when I first started, I think I had, 100 views, maybe 10 views on a single video, and maybe 3 likes, which was very exciting for me at the time because these were three people who were not following me. But yes, I think in the beginning, and this is true if you are thinking about building your personal brand on any social platforms, when you are starting, you are naturally going to have fewer followers. You're naturally going to have fewer of those verifying social numbers like likes, comments, shares. You're going to have a little bit less than that. But the beauty is, you're also going to have space to experiment. You're going to have space to fail because you have fewer followers and you have fewer people looking. And I would say also that in this day and age, whatever platform you're on, with the algorithm, and all algorithms are different and they change constantly, it's really helpful to think, okay, even if I make these 3 videos, say between this week and next week, I don't know that my audience will see all three. Right? I don't know that my audience will even see any of the three, just with the way that the algorithm works. So it's helpful to keep consistently putting out content that has the same brand voice. And we focus on that because we want to make sure that if you put out 5 videos that are very similar, someone maybe will be able to catch one. So, also, I find that a little reassuring because if not all 5 videos are perfect, just think that your ideal customer, your ideal person, your ideal demographic will maybe see one of those 5 that you do. So hopefully that takes a little bit of the pressure of perfection off.
Absolutely agree. And then it becomes so much easier to create that content too because it doesn't have to be perfect. It goes faster. But let's speak about a bit about that.
Yes.
So you talk a lot about like the biggest fear of a technical expert is that posting is going to become their second job
Yeah.
and like keep me away from the real work. So, what are your tips for not burning out and for it not becoming a second job?
Yeah, so I was during the break when I was just speaking to myself a little bit, I mentioned a couple of tools that I like to use because what you should be doing is one of two things really. One is identifying tools that can help you move more quickly and can help you repost content across multiple platforms. And then the other thing is, of course, you can always hire someone to help you be more efficient, help you with your content stream. And I think so many people are so hesitant to hire too because they think, well, I'm not a famous person. I don't need extra help. But sometimes it's very helpful to hire a part time person to streamline things, to make things go quicker. But in terms of tools, there's so many great tools out there. And of course, there's whichever chatbot tool you use. I'm not going to advocate necessarily for one in particular, but I'll say the two that I regularly use is Adobe Acrobat, and then specifically I use their AI assistant because I have a lot of documents I need to look through as an author. I do a lot of research, and so my assistant will give me just giant piles of documents, and then I use something like Adobe Acrobat's AI assistant to really analyze those documents, and I can query against them in a safe environment. And so that's one thing I want to talk about also is safety in AI. That's an entire other conversation. We don't need to do that conversation right now, but I think it's always helpful to think about that. And the other product that I use is Adobe Express specifically to take one piece of content and then resize it and use it across multiple platforms. So I think about one great example is I just took this really beautiful photo. I was at a really nice mansion for a movie screening in LA. So LA of me to say that. And I took this beautiful photo and I resized it for multiple platforms using this technology. And there's other technology that can also do this for you, but I happen to use Adobe Express and I resized it for a Substack banner. I resized it for a LinkedIn article banner, which are, by the way, sadly, two different sizes. Very annoying. And then I resized it for an Instagram post. I resized it for a LinkedIn post. I think however you can get your content also to get the most mileage out of it for you, that is also going to help you. So you're not also doing many photo shoots. You don't have to retake multiple photos. Or if you have a graphic that you like, you can resize it across many platforms. So just thinking about how to be able to reuse what you already have intelligently across multiple platforms is going to save you a lot of headaches.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And in addition to tools, then you speak about minimal viable content.
Yes.
So, what does it look like for a B2B expert who only has 30 minutes a week to spare? Besides having the tools, what does the
Yes.
process look like?
Okay, so for me, I love to have a bank. Just like we should have good finances, right? We should also have a content bank. So we have not only our financial bank account, we have a content bank. And I love a content bank because that's where I put my evergreen content. So I try to bank content. I try to create in batches. So if you have 30 minutes a week, right? Let's even say that, right? Even less, but if you have 30 minutes a week, then you can take that 30 minutes, especially in the first week, create 2 or 3 pieces of content. And suddenly you have 2 to 3 weeks worth of content because you can post one of those posts a week and you put them in your content bank. And every single week you create more content that you put into your bank. So you're always banking pieces of content that you can then use later. Now, if you have 30 minutes a day, that's even more powerful because that means that you can create 2 or 3 pieces of content a day and then spread them out during the week. To me, it's about what is your sustainable content level. So, how much can you create, but sustainably create that? Because one thing that is not helpful is if you suddenly create 50 pieces of content and then you release them all in 1 week and then you don't post for months at a time, that's not good. And then also, I should bring out scheduling tools and scheduling software also
Oh
exists,
yeah.
right? And but also I'll say this, LinkedIn has its own internal scheduling tool that if you don't want to get more third-party tools, you can use LinkedIn's own internal tools to schedule out your content. So say you don't want to put in the bank, then schedule it out for the future.
It's kind of a bank as well. If you're thinking about quality and frequency, you've got
Yes.
your stuff in the bank, but how often should you be posting?
So once again, I am less of a you absolutely have to post 3 times a week because if I say you absolutely have to post 3 times a week and then you can do that for 1 week and then once again you never post again, that is not consistency or sustainability. But I will say if say you say I for sure can post once a week. I can guarantee that I absolutely can post once a week. Once a week is a really great starting point. So being able to post once a week. And then I would say, ideally, if you have the time, being able to post, say, 2 or 3 times a week is even better. And that is really going to be true across many different platforms, across LinkedIn, across Instagram, across something even like Substack, across Threads. So, however often you can post, if you can start with the once a week. And one way that I find is really helpful, at least to some of the people that I work with, is if you truly are that busy, and so many of us are, setting aside one day. Maybe that's a Wednesday. Wednesday is your content day. That's the day you create content. That's the day you schedule and post. That's the day you respond. Having one day a week that you set aside and you're like, this is the day we're going to clear the deck. We're going to make sure that we get through all of our content that we need to do. And this is the day of the week that I pick. And for some people, this is actually the weekend. Some people say, because, Monday through Friday, you're busy doing calls, you're busy doing meetings and work, etc. So some people I know who write more long form content every Saturday. They sit down and they take 2 or 3 hours and they write their long form content, which then they schedule for the rest of the week.
Got it. And can commenting be a shortcut for introverts? Does that work at all?
Yes, so commenting is great. In fact, I would say that one thing that people miss out on is you can comment whenever someone comments on your post. It's really powerful and helpful to respond to them. Respond and say thank you, even if it's just responding if they have a question, to respond to that question intelligently. It's so helpful to respond back. And if you are just starting to grow your social media presence, it is also really, really helpful then to not only go on to other people's profiles that have the audience demographic that you want to reach and then start commenting on their profiles, right? And one thing that I tell people to be careful of is most people only want to comment on profiles that have a million followers. But it's very helpful to look at people who are actually in the five-figure range because that those people are more likely to also respond to your comments, right? They're more likely to acknowledge you and you can build that rapport. And also the more you get that the more you are seen as positively interacting in the algorithm, the more the algorithm might send you more followers your way too.
Yep, that's right. And you will be seen as that person who is commenting back and also interacting. So, kind of your conversations are live and
Yep.
public, and it's less pressure than the actual post as your own as well.
Yes.
Let's talk about the shift in the mindset, especially for more introverted and more technical people as well. So, how does shifting into more teaching mindset lowers the barrier for them to come into the posting life? Because it removes some light away from them, probably.
Yeah, so I think about edutainment, right? Which is education plus entertainment. I think it's such a great term. And I think that when you think about it that way, when you're educating, when you're teaching, and you're also entertaining, then it becomes something that is really, really helpful. Then it becomes something that if you take yourself out of it, well, you are sharing your expertise. So then I think that becomes also less scary because instead of saying, I am out there just doing pure entertainment content, you're not creating content like you were on TikTok. You're creating content like you are going to be very helpful. You're going to share what you know, which is once again your subject matter expertise. And then you're also going to talk with, say, your peers. So thinking about directing it to your peers or people who want to learn that specific subject is going to be incredibly, incredibly helpful.
But how do you then find those lessons in your everyday life? Like, what I
Yes.
do is boring. What do I say?
So I think that there's a couple of formats that work really well, right? One is case studies. So what are case studies in your work life? So what is a project that you're also, I always have to say, caveat, or what are you allowed to talk about at work, right? So what is a case study that you're allowed to talk about at work, either at your current job or at a previous job? So say you are a product leader and you can't talk about any of the products that you're currently working on. But one thing that you could talk about then is also leadership in general. So, one thing is if you are at all running a team or part of a team, you can always talk about teamwork and leadership. I think also are really great starting points because if you're a leader without talking about specifics of a project, you can talk about leading a team and how you make sure that the team works well and interfaces across multiple other teams, etc. If you are a team member, you can say, well, these are three helpful things that my leader, either in this role or previous roles, has helped me with. Here are helpful things there. It's always helpful to also talk about things that are not necessarily directly related then to a project, which are big career learning lessons. So
Hmm.
that's also another bucket that I think is really helpful is what are some big career lessons that you've learned that you would impart either, and these are two options, either impart on yourself if you were significantly younger and just starting out, or impart on someone who is in your role but very junior, but not necessarily yourself, but say a mentee. If you had a mentee, what would you tell them about your role? What would be helpful there? So those are a couple of different, hopefully helpful formats to
Thank you.
explore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing because there are two buckets. There are people who probably want to post, but are not sure what to do, or are we cringe? Do I know what to post about? But then there's a
Right.
group of people who are will be okay to post if they get enough help. And marketing loves those people
Yeah.
because we need to help marketing to help those people to start posting. So if we shift gears a little bit and talk about how can marketing help the experts in the company to be more relevant, to start posting and to make it as easy as possible for them. What are the tips for marketers?
Yes. So once again, I think having templatized posts is really helpful. So sharing visual assets. So once that means either sharing video clips or sharing images that are already designed. So that way it's such an easy just post. Also sharing text that's been approved, that's been thoughtfully written. And maybe you say, share these three sentences, but develop your own thoughts around them, right? Around this launch, right? From your perspective of launching this product. And I think these are all helpful parameters to help other people who are less comfortable, who are not marketers, to launch. And then I think also, once again, I remember I spoke at one company and they had a 20-page guidebook for posting on social if you are not a marketer. And that I think was actually very helpful because it was guidelines, right? It was something. And I will say this too, they had just, and this was maybe 2 years ago, but and they were B2B too, but they had just also started their internal ambassador program. So these are employees at the company who signed up because they're excited about the company and they wanted to help promote. So one thing that I definitely suggest, and I've advised companies on this, is starting up internal ambassador programs is something that I think is incredibly powerful, and more B2B companies need to do this and need to be thoughtful about how they're thinking and really implementing starting out with internal ambassador programs, because then you have a group of basically super fans who are always willing to post, who are excited to get on a call of say 10 to 20, or it depends on how large your organization is. Maybe that's 200 people, right? Um, it just needs to be manageable. It needs to be a number of people that is actually internally manageable and that you can say, okay, once a quarter, you're going to post about something new. So we're gonna give you all the assets for it. We're gonna give you copy, and then we want you to make it your own, right? And then you're going to post about it. So also having a specific routine, a specific cadence, a specific number of posts that you would have this internal group do, that's also very helpful. And I think it's helpful just to tell people because most people are so lost with content creation that if you tell them, we'd love you to post once a quarter. Here are the two or three posts you can choose between. This is the once a quarter time. Please pick one and we will amplify you. So that's the other powerful thing that you can do as a company, which is say, okay, if you do post about our product in a positive light and it's, what we've talked about along these guidelines, we will amplify your posts. And then I have such an extra incentive as an employee to post because I'm suddenly being amplified by such a larger company, such a larger entity than myself that has many more followers. And it feels also good because then that shows, say, the next employer, look how active I am. So it makes you a little bit layoff proof, which in this day and age, how could we not want to be a little bit more layoff proof?
100%. And it's a win-win for both the company because I have been exposed to so many of those types of ads where there is an employee speaking about their own company and then that is being amplified by the company. There are more wins than
Right.
anything else.
And if we want to just talk about the mechanics behind that. So, right now on LinkedIn, there are thought leader ads, right? So, you can, as a company, and this doesn't have to be someone who works at the company, but I think it is really powerful when it is. You can amplify in an ad form as a thought leader, someone who works at your company and have a post be, then you can put ad spend behind it on LinkedIn. And these are a little bit different than traditional ads because they'll show on the little banner that you are doing a thought leader boosted post in conjunction with this person. So I think that that's really, really powerful.
That
Um,
is great.
yeah,
Goldie, let's speak a bit about measurement of those as well, because if somebody is starting off, even though if they're getting some help from marketing, they usually don't see that much of likes, what people think that the success looks like
right.
of posting. But as soon as those quiet experts start their personal brand, what is actually driving the B2B pipeline and trust and value? So, are the right measurements to look for?
So I think especially on if we want to take LinkedIn as a platform, I think that it's more important instead of thinking about immediately conversion, right? Which I
Yeah.
think so many people want to jump to conversion because it's a great metric. I think a lot of it is about having exposure to the brand. So a lot of it is awareness, right? We're really talking about the very beginning of the funnel. When we're thinking about B2B, I think awareness is incredibly important. So that's saying that every single time someone posts about the company and there are even two or three likes on that post, that is going to be helpful and better than zero likes. You're building in that awareness, which will then grow over time. And I'm glad you said use the word trust because as awareness grows, trust also usually naturally grows, right? Unless something wild happens, then you don't have that trust. But usually, for most people and most personal brands, and especially B2B personal brands, as you grow, as you continue to post, as you continue to share, once again, sharing your expertise, your educational entertainment over time, you begin to grow that trust, you grow that visibility, you grow that expertise level also that you are seen as a thought leader, as an expert. There's a reason why LinkedIn calls their internal ads thought leader ads. You're growing that thought leadership over time, which is also, once again, very helpful for not only you, but also the brand and the company at large that you work with.
Nice. If we talk about the next steps, so somebody heard you, got crazy inspired, and they want to start. What
Yeah.
is the next thing that they need to do this week?
So I think one of the most helpful things that they can do this week is doing a post, right? So starting on your content journey. These days, personal branding, especially online, personal branding online truly doesn't exist without content. And it's always best if you shape that narrative yourself, right? If you are the person that is controlling that story and you control that story by posting your own content. So I would suggest that you start this week, post something, and it can be absolutely imperfect, just like we talked about. It doesn't need to be perfect at all. We just want to make sure that we're starting to post and make a commitment to post. We're in early March right now. Make a commitment to post once a week for the rest of March and just see what happens.
Nice. And if somebody is still hesitant, what are they missing out?
So I think you're missing out on potential career opportunities, whether that's internally at the place that you work, being able to work on multiple teams, getting exposure because you are more present to management, to other teams. Or if you are looking for a new role, you're missing out on the ability to potentially jump because people see you as an expert and they were getting more exposure to you than if were somebody that they had never heard about before. So it's so powerful from two different types of perspectives.
Thank you so much for dropping your knowledge because there are so many tips and tricks for everybody to pick up. Even if you are already posting, I've learned so many new things from tooling that, like, the just cutting the right picture sizes was new for me as well.
Right, right. I think the new image sizes, I think images are so frustrating because, for example, I post a lot on Instagram as well. Instagram always is changing the sizes, right? They're like, this is optimal. Now this is optimal. Now this is optimal. So it's helpful to just have tools that make your life easier. And once again, if you don't want to use tools, you can hire a human who can then help you resize and do all that for you. And it's a really great way then to also take work off of your plate because everyone I'm sure who's watching this and listening to this is probably a very busy person.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly. Goldie, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody who has tuned in, thank you very much for joining. I'm sorry for a small technical difficulty with internet, but Goldie got it. So she has
Yeah.
helped us out to continue the conversation with you all. Thank you so much for showing up. And yeah, catch the topic and the rest of them on the Attributed podcast as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.